It began in silence. Not the kind that comes with peace, but the kind that lingers after a memory refuses to fade. Keanu stood at the window of a small wooden cabin tucked away in the stillness of Big Sur. Outside, the Pacific waves whispered their slow, aching rhythm against the jagged cliffs, and the scent of cedar clung to the air like an old photograph. He wasn't running from anything, not anymore. But he wasn't chasing, either. At 60, he moved like a man who had seen too much, lost too much, and finally accepted that life didn't owe him explanations. The world still called him icon, legend, the internet's boyfriend. But he hadn't touched a film set in nearly 3 years. He didn't miss the lights. Not really. What he missed was her. Her name was Elise. She was never famous. Not in the red carpet sense. She was famous to the people who mattered, the women at the hospice center where she worked, the children whose fears she could soothe with a single glance, and the older ladies at her church who swore her pies were blessed by God himself. They had met when he wasn't looking, which, in his case, was always. He had arrived at the clinic to visit a sick friend, an old stunt double from his John Wick days who was quietly losing a battle with ALS. Keanu wasn't one for grand entrances. He walked in with a paper cup of coffee in one hand and a tattered paperback in the other. The nurses barely looked up, but Elise noticed. Not because of who he was. In fact, she didn't recognize him right away. She noticed because of how gently he pulled the chair up beside the hospital bed, how he read aloud without dramatics, and how he reached for the old man's hand during the hard parts. She watched for a week. Then, one day, after Keanu left the room, she stopped him near the vending machine. "You're a good man," she said, handing him a packet of peanut M&Ms. "And you read like you've lost someone." He didn't say anything. He just smiled that crooked, grateful smile. The one that didn't try too hard. And that was it. What followed wasn't whirlwind romance. It was quieter than that. Softer. Like the slow bloom of a late-season flower. She didn't ask about his movies, and he didn't try to impress her. They talked about music. She loved jazz. He leaned toward grunge. They debated over coffee shops. They both hated texting. Sundays became theirs. Brunch, then used bookstores, then long drives without maps. Elise was 10 years older. When the tabloids caught wind, they were ruthless. Keanu's cougar. Age-defying romance. He never answered them. Not once. And when a reporter shouted a crude question across a sidewalk in downtown LA, he paused, turned, and simply said, "She's the love of my life. Grow up." They stayed out of the spotlight. Her world was gardens, poetry, and patience. His was quieter now, motorcycles, guitars, and her. They didn't need to post. They lived. But then, life turned. As it does. She was the one who noticed first. The little things, forgetting a name, mixing up days, pausing mid-sentence. He laughed it off. But she didn't. Not Elise. She knew what Alzheimer's looked like. She'd seen it in too many rooms, in too many eyes. It was early onset. Rare. Unforgiving. And though he was the one with millions in the bank, it was Elise who showed him how to prepare for goodbye. He built the cabin for her. Not as a fortress, but as a retreat. A place where time could be gentle, where the world wouldn't stare. For a while, they lived there together. She painted. He cooked. He read to her the same way he had read to his dying friend. Then, one morning, she didn't remember him. Not just his face. She didn't remember the sound of his voice. The smell of cedar. The ring he had given her silver, engraved with the word still. She stared at him like he was a kind stranger. And he didn't cry. He just sat down beside her, took her hand, and introduced himself all over again. Every day, he did that. Until she forgot what day it was. Then what a book was. Then what hands were. And finally, what love meant. When she passed, it was without struggle. Just a soft exhale. And Keanu, holding her hand, whispered, "You were everything." The tabloids wrote headlines. "Tragedy strikes again. Reeves mourns secret love." But they didn't know her. They didn't know what she gave him, not fame, not fire, but peace. Now, alone in the cabin, Keanu stared at the ocean like it might answer something. He hadn't acted since. Not really. He'd narrated a children's book once, for a charity Elise used to support. But he didn't want to be a comeback. He wanted to feel again. Until the letter arrived. It was handwritten, in Elise's script. Dated 5 months before she passed. It read, "My darling, if you're reading this, I've probably forgotten you. But I want you to remember me. Not the woman in the bed, but the woman who danced barefoot in the rain, who beat you at chess, twice, who made you promise to keep riding that death trap motorcycle. Don't disappear into grief. Use it. Build something with it. Tell our story. Or better yet, live a new one. There's a girl at the library in Monterey. Her name is Clara. She's the daughter of my best friend who passed a few years ago. She reminds me of you. Thoughtful, quiet, lonely in a loud world. I've told her about you. Not the movie star. You. Go find her. Even if you don't say a word. Just be there. Still yours. Elise. He read it twice. Then once more. The ink was smudged near the bottom, as if Elise had cried while writing. Or maybe he just imagined that part. The next morning, Keanu packed a bag, fed the neighbor's dog, and left the cabin. He didn't know what he was walking into. He just knew that Elise, brilliant, brave Elise, had left him one more thing to do. And for the first time in years, he wanted to do it. He didn't tell anyone he was leaving. He didn't text his agent. Didn't leave a note on the porch. He just turned the key in the ignition of his black 1973 Norton Commando, let the engine purr like it had missed the road as much as he had, and pointed himself south toward Monterey. The coast was quiet that morning, with the sea blending into the sky like they'd made peace overnight. Keanu kept the visor of his helmet cracked open, letting the salt air sting his face. It kept him awake. It kept him from thinking too much. Elise had taught him that some moments should be felt in the chest, not picked apart in the mind. It was late afternoon when he pulled into the parking lot behind the Monterey Public Library. It was smaller than he expected, worn brick, ivy climbing up one side, the kind of place that looked like it had secrets tucked between every bookshelf. He didn't go in right away. He just stood across the street, watching. He wasn't sure what he was even looking for. He hadn't seen a photo. He didn't even know Clara's last name. But Elise's letter had been clear. She was in there. After 10 minutes, a young woman stepped out, holding a stack of books. She had that look about her, distracted but focused, like someone who carried too many thoughts and not enough pockets to hold them in. Her hair was curly, unbrushed in a way that suggested she cared more about ideas than impressions. She wore a cardigan with mismatched buttons and a pair of vintage boots that looked older than she was. Keanu didn't approach. Not yet. He watched her load the books into her car, fumble for her keys, then paused to help an elderly man who had dropped his tote bag on the sidewalk. That was the moment he knew. Elise had been right. Again. The next day, he came back. This time, he stepped inside. The library smelled like dust and stories. The kind of smell you don't notice until you miss it. A few kids giggled in the children's corner. An older couple argued softly over the pronunciation of Proust. And behind the main desk, Clara sat, her fingers dancing across a keyboard, her eyes scanning a screen with a kind of elegant intensity. Keanu walked up and placed a worn copy of The Little Prince on the desk. She looked up. For a moment, nothing. Just quiet recognition. Like maybe he looked familiar, but she couldn't place it. Then, a polite smile. Professional. Friendly. Checking this one out? She asked. He nodded. She began typing, then paused. You don't have a library card with us. No, he said. I don't. Want one? He hesitated, then said, Yes, I do. She handed him a form. Name. He looked at her. Really looked at her. Then quietly said, Keanu. Her hands froze on the keyboard. Like, she began, but didn't finish. He gave the smallest smile. Just, Keanu. She blinked, then smiled again, wider this time. Okay, just Keanu. Over the next few days, he kept coming back. Always quiet. Always with a book. Sometimes he read, sometimes he didn't. He watched her interact with patrons. He watched the way she bit her lip when concentrating, or how she tucked a pen behind her ear when both her hands were full. Eventually, she asked, So, are you retired? Sort of, he said. And you're living in Monterey now? No, just passing through. She tilted her head. For how long? He looked down at the copy of The Alchemist he had picked up. Until I finish this, maybe. She laughed. It was a good sound, warm and unguarded. One evening, as the sky turned gold behind the stained glass windows, Clara came over to the reading nook where he always sat. She held a tray with 2 paper cups of hot tea. You always sit alone. I figured we could change that, she said, offering one. He accepted. Their fingers brushed. It was brief, but not forgettable. They talked. At first about books, then about music, then about grief. She told him her mother died 3 years ago, that the ache never really left, it just got quieter. He listened, said nothing, just nodded. That was enough. Finally, she asked, What about you? Have you lost someone? He stared into his cup. Yes, he said. She didn't press. She didn't need to. As the weeks slipped by, their conversations deepened. There was no flirting, not really. just two souls leaning into the safety of each other's presence. Keanu never mentioned Elise. Not yet. But in every look, every pause, she lingered. One Sunday afternoon, Clara found him sitting on the library steps long after closing time. "You waiting for me?" she asked. "No," he said. "I was just remembering something." She sat beside him. "Anything good?" He hesitated, then looked at her. "Elise," he said. Her name was Elise. Clara said nothing, just waited. She worked in hospice, wore the same perfume every day. It smelled like bergamot and firewood. She read poetry before bed, made me laugh when I didn't want to, made me believe there was still something left to feel. He paused, swallowed. "She forgot me." Slowly, then all at once. Clara's hand slid over his. Not forcefully, just enough. "I think she wanted me to meet you," he said softly. Clara's eyes welled, but she didn't cry. "Why?" He looked out at the horizon. "Because you're kind, and lonely, and still open." She leaned her head against his shoulder. They stayed that way for a long time. Later that night, back at his cabin, Keanu found another envelope in the back of Elise's journal. Inside was a photograph. Clara, maybe 16, standing with Elise in a sunflower field. Both of them were laughing. There was no caption, no note. Just the image. Elise had planned this, not as a replacement, but as a continuation. Love didn't end. It shifted. It waited. And in the quiet corners of a small library in Monterey, it began to stir again. They didn't call it anything. What was forming between them didn't have a label. It was too new, too gentle for that. But it moved, slow and certain, like ocean fog rolling in. Not abrupt, just inevitable. Clara began waiting for him without meaning to. She'd glance at the clock around 3:40 each afternoon, knowing he usually showed up just before 4. If he was 5 minutes late, she'd find her hands restless. If he didn't come at all, her shift felt longer, lonelier. But he always came. Never missed a day. They didn't always speak. Some days, they just read. Two people in separate chairs, barely a few feet apart, turning pages with the kind of comfort that felt like prayer. Sometimes he'd bring her little things, a thermos of jasmine tea, a poetry book he thought she might like, once even a drawing he'd done on a napkin of a cat curled up on a windowsill. She kept that one pinned to the corkboard behind her desk. What Clara didn't know, what she couldn't yet imagine, was how carefully Keanu was letting this happen. Not rushing, not taking, just being. He was used to people wanting something from him. A selfie, a statement, a moment they could clip and post. But Clara never asked for anything. She didn't even Google him, at least not until 2 weeks after they first met, and even then only once. What she found overwhelmed her. Not the fame, not the headlines, but the grief that seemed to trail behind him like a shadow. Still, she never brought it up. And for that, Keanu was quietly, deeply grateful. One rainy Tuesday, the library was nearly empty. The sky outside wept steady and slow, casting the reading room in a soft gray light. Clara was shelving returns, and Keanu stood watching a storm roll in through the wide bay windows. "You ever wonder," Clara asked without turning, "why some people seem to carry sadness like a scent?" Keanu blinked. "What do you mean?" "Like, it walks into the room with them. Not loud, not dramatic, just there. Like a cologne you don't forget." He thought about it, then answered, "Maybe because it's not sadness. Maybe it's memory." She turned to look at him, her eyes curious, not judging. "Do I carry it?" he asked. She didn't hesitate. "Yes." He nodded, quietly, then smiled a little. "That's fair." That evening, he asked her to dinner. Nothing fancy, just a cafe near the beach, one of those family-run places where the chairs wobble and the waitresses know every name. He chose a table in the corner. She ordered soup. He had pasta. They talked for 3 hours. About books, childhood, loneliness, about the people they used to be and the people they didn't expect to become. Clara told him she used to write letters to herself as a teenager, letters for the woman she hoped she'd grow into. She never sent them, of course, but she kept them in a shoebox under her bed. "Sometimes," she admitted, "I still read them, to remind myself who I promised I'd be." Keanu listened carefully. That's what he did best. When he finally spoke, it wasn't with advice, it was with confession. "I stopped planning for the future a long time ago," he said. "I think, after enough loss, you start to believe time is a thief you can't outrun." Clara didn't flinch, didn't pity him. She just whispered, "Maybe you don't outrun it. Maybe you just walk beside it." The check came. They split it. She insisted. He respected that. As they walked outside, the rain had cleared, but but the air still carried the weight of it. A mist floated over the sidewalk, and the sound of waves crashing in the distance felt almost scripted. She stopped near his motorcycle. "You don't have a helmet for me," she said, smiling. "Next time," he answered. "Promise." He didn't say anything, just touched her shoulder, gently. The next day, she found a helmet waiting for her at the library. Matte black. Simple. Her name written inside in silver ink. Clara stared at it for a long time before finally picking it up. Something about it felt permanent. That weekend, they rode. Down Route 1, past the cliffs and cypress trees, past the miles of coastline Elise once loved. Keanu didn't drive fast. He let the road lead them, winding slowly through memory and into something new. When they reached a spot Elise used to paint, he stopped. They sat on a boulder, sharing a thermos of coffee, watching the waves roll in. "She brought me here once," he said. "Told me it looked like the edge of the world." Clara said nothing for a moment. Then, "Did she tell you to find me?" He looked at her. His expression changed. Not shock, not fear, just honesty. "Yes," he said. Clara turned back to the sea. "And what if I don't live up to the story?" Keanu reached for her hand. "You already are," he said. In that silence, something broke open between them. Not love, not yet, but the ache that makes love possible. That rare, sacred sense that maybe, just maybe, healing wasn't about forgetting, but remembering with someone who can hold the weight with you. After that day, they didn't talk about Elise again. Not directly, but her presence stayed with them, in the music Clara played softly at work, in the way Keanu looked at paintings, in the pauses between sentences. One morning, Clara brought him a photo. "I found this in Elise's old boxes," she said. "It's from when I was a kid. I think she always wanted us to meet." In the photo, Clara was maybe 5, sitting on Elise's lap, laughing with her whole face. Her little hands held a daisy chain. Her hair was wilder back then. Her smile hadn't changed. "She used to call you the quiet storm," Clara added. Keanu chuckled. "She told me I was thunder pretending to be mist." Clara nodded. "Sounds about right." From that moment, things deepened. He came to her apartment. She cooked him dinner, vegetable lasagna that nearly burned but somehow tasted perfect. He fixed the broken faucet in her kitchen. She alphabetized his record collection. They didn't call it dating. They didn't need to. They just kept showing up. One night, Clara asked him to read to her. "Just for a bit," she said, handing him a book of Mary Oliver poems. He read softly, his voice a warm hush in the stillness of her living room. When he finished, she didn't speak, just leaned against him. "Keanu," she whispered, "are you afraid of starting over?" He thought for a long time. "No," he said. "I'm afraid of wasting what's left." She didn't kiss him then. She didn't need to. The silence between them held more intimacy than touch. Outside, the wind shifted. Something was changing, and neither of them wanted to stop it. Keanu started dreaming again. For years, his nights had been empty, just dark stretches of sleep broken by the occasional memory, or worse, the kind of silence that rang too loud in his chest. But now, there were dreams. Of running through sunflower fields, of a woman's laughter echoing off canyon walls, of Clara turning toward him in slow motion, always smiling, always there. He didn't tell her about the dreams. Not because they scared him, quite the opposite. He kept them to himself because they felt like seeds, fragile and new. He didn't want to rush them. Didn't want to name something that hadn't fully bloomed. Clara, for her part, had grown used to the gentle rhythm of his presence. He didn't ask for anything. Didn't demand explanations. He never pushed. He simply showed up, day after day, like a tide that had finally found the right shore. But with that comfort came the weight of unspoken things. One evening, after they had dinner at a small candlelit diner just outside Carmel, they took a walk on the beach. The stars were sharp and quiet. Their footsteps left twin trails in the sand. Clara was the first to break the silence. "I keep waiting for it," she said softly. "For what?" Keanu asked. "For the turn. The part where you pull away. The part where the story changes and I become just another chapter." He stopped walking, turned to her. "I don't write endings that way," he said. "Not anymore." She stared at him, eyes glossy in the starlight. "Don't promise me things you don't know how to keep." "I'm not promising," he said. "I'm just choosing." They kept walking. But the weight of her words clung to him, and he understood why. When you've lost enough, even kindness can feel like a threat. And Keanu had lived long enough to know that love wasn't just about showing up. It was about staying when it got complicated. A week later, Clara got the call. Her father, who lived alone up north, had suffered a fall. He was stable, but shaken. She needed to go, probably for a few days. Keanu offered to drive her. She hesitated. "You don't have to do that." "I know," he said. "That's why it matters." The drive was 6 hours, through pine forest and long stretches of empty highway. Clara slept part of the way. When she woke, his jacket was draped over her shoulders, and music played softly through the speakers, an old jazz record Elise had once loved. When they arrived, she introduced him not as a friend, or a boyfriend, or anything with a title. "This is Keanu," she told her father. "He's someone good." Her father nodded. "Those are hard to find." Keanu stayed in a nearby motel. Every morning, he brought Clara coffee. Every night, they sat on the porch of her father's house, talking under the weight of the stars. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't cinematic. It was real. Clara told him stories from her childhood, about camping trips gone wrong, her mother's obsession with hummingbirds, the time she broke her arm climbing a tree trying to impress a boy who never looked up. Keanu laughed in that low, warm way that always made her chest tighten. "I wish I'd known you back then," he said one night. She looked at him. "You wouldn't have liked me." "I would have loved you," he said. Silence. Then her voice. "That's the scariest thing you've said." He didn't take it back. By the fourth day, her father was walking again, joking again, ready to be left alone. Clara stood by her car, watching the trees shift in the wind, unsure if she was ready to go back. Not just to Monterey, but to the rhythm that had started to form between them. It terrified her. The intimacy. The closeness. The possibility of losing again. Keanu leaned against the passenger door. "You're allowed to be afraid," he said. "I don't want to need you." "You don't." She looked up, startled. "You want me," he said. "That's different." Tears welled. She blinked them back. She hated crying in front of anyone. But with him, it was different. With him, nothing felt shameful. They drove home in near silence. Not because they had nothing to say, but because what needed saying was still working its way into words neither of them fully knew yet. That night, back in her apartment, she poured them each a glass of wine. They sat close on the couch, knees touching. She turned to him, her voice low. "What if I'm not ready?" "I'm not asking you to be," he said. "I don't know how to love someone who's already been loved so completely by someone else." His voice didn't waver. "You don't have to be Elise. I don't want you to be Elise." She nodded. "But you miss her. Every day." "Then how do I fit in?" He reached for her hand. "You don't fit in. You expand the story." They kissed for the first time that night. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't some movie scene passion moment. It was human. Real. Two people pressing past the weight of memory and into something present. She tasted like red wine and nervous laughter. He tasted like warmth in the edge of a new season. They didn't sleep together that night. They just held each other. Her head on his chest. His fingers tracing circles on her back. Like two halves of a conversation that had waited decades to be heard. In the morning, he cooked breakfast. Burnt the eggs. They laughed. It felt like beginning again. Over the next few weeks, the rhythm deepened. He stayed at her place most nights. They planted a small herb garden on her windowsill. She taught him how to play chess properly. He taught her how to change a motorcycle spark plug. The whispers began around town. A few people recognized him. A few snapped photos. But Clara didn't care. And neither did he. Then one morning, an envelope arrived. No name. Just an address. Inside, a script. Titled, Still. A quiet indie film about grief, memory, and rediscovery. A woman not unlike Elise. A man not unlike Keanu. The role wasn't flashy. There were no gunfights. No slow-motion chases. Just a story. Honest. Raw. He read it twice. Then looked at Clara. "I think I might be ready." She didn't ask him to stay. She didn't tell him not to go. She just held his hand and whispered, "Come back when it's done." He kissed her on the forehead. And for the first time in years, he said goodbye to someone with hope instead of fear. The studio was in the high desert outside Santa Fe. Nothing like the glossy sound stages of Los Angeles. There were no paparazzi, no handlers with earpieces, no catered sushi trays. Just a rented house with worn wooden floors, a director who barely spoke above a whisper, and a script that didn't need explosions to leave scars. The film was small, intimate, a single camera, handheld. The budget was tight. But Keanu didn't ask about money, didn't ask about the schedule. He just showed up. Every morning he arrived first. Every night he left last. The crew was young, too young to have seen Speed in theaters, too polite to bring up The Matrix more than once. They didn't treat him like a legend. They treated him like a scene partner, a man. And he liked it that way. The role was hard. Not because it demanded physicality, but because it required something deeper, honesty. He played a man who had lost his wife to early dementia, who retreated from the world until a quiet librarian reminded him how to feel again. It wasn't based on Elise, But it was Elise. In every breath, in every pause, in every gaze held a second too long. The first week of filming, he struggled with a scene where his character visits the woman's empty bedroom. The room still smells like her perfume. Her favorite sweater is still on the chair. He walks in, sits on the bed, and says nothing. The director asked for a dozen takes. Keanu gave him 15. On the last one, he didn't sit. He just stood in the doorway, hand on the frame, eyes on the pillow where she used to sleep. Tears came not forced, not performed. The director whispered, "Cut," but no one moved. The silence stretched. Reverent. Afterward, Keanu walked outside alone, hands trembling. He called Clara. "I thought I was ready," he said. "You were," she replied. "You are. But that doesn't mean it doesn't still hurt." He didn't speak. "Breathe, Keanu," she said, soft as ever. "Don't just act. Heal." It was the thing he didn't know he needed to hear. That night, he wrote her a letter. Not a text. Not an email. A real letter. It read, "Clara, I didn't come here to make a movie. I came here to tell the truth. Yours. K." He mailed it with a pressed leaf inside sage from the desert outside his trailer. Back in Monterey, Clara read it 3 times, then folded it into her journal. That night, she lit a candle on the windowsill, let the ocean breeze carry the scent of sage through her apartment, and whispered into the quiet, "Come home when you're ready." The film wrapped in 6 weeks. No big party. No red carpet. Just hugs, quiet goodbyes, and a single whispered, "Thank you" from the director as Keanu walked off set. He didn't fly home. He rode. 6 days. Through empty highways and forgotten towns. Stopping at diners where no one knew his name. Sleeping under stars that reminded him the world was still beautiful, even when it ached. When he reached Monterey, it was just after dusk. Clara wasn't home. He let himself into her apartment. He had the key now. He placed his helmet on the table, took off his boots, sat on the couch and waited. When she came through the door, carrying a bag of groceries, her breath caught. "You came back," she said. "I promised." She dropped the bag, walked over, and for the first time since he met her, she kissed him first. It was different now. It was certain. He stayed. Weeks passed, then months. And suddenly, they weren't counting days anymore, just living them. The film premiered at a small festival in Colorado. Keanu didn't want to go. Clara convinced him. "You don't owe them a performance," she said. "You owe yourself a moment." They went together. It wasn't glamorous. Folding chairs, plastic cups of wine, a projector screen that flickered when the wind kicked up. But when the credits rolled, no one clapped. They just sat, silent, moved. Someone finally whispered, "That's the most human thing I've ever seen." Keanu didn't take a bow. He just reached for Clara's hand and squeezed. The next morning, offers poured in. Studio execs, interview requests, awards chatter. He turned them all down. All but one. A small independent project about a couple in their 60s who open a second-hand bookstore in a coastal town and fall in love without ever saying the words. He sent the script to Clara. At the bottom, he wrote, "Want to be in this one with me?" She stared at it, then called him, her voice shaking. "I'm not an actress." "You don't need to be," he said. "Just be you." She said yes. They filmed it together the following spring. It was strange at first, standing in front of cameras, reading lines. But soon, it felt less like acting and more like remembering a dream you hadn't dared believe. They improvised most of it. The laughter, the pauses, the way her hand found his without needing to look. The film didn't break records. It broke hearts. Women across the country, especially older women, wrote letters, emails, comments, stories of lost husbands, forgotten love. The kind that lingers in empty teacups and the smell of old books. Clara read every message. One, from a woman in Ohio, said, "Watching you two made me believe it's not too late to begin again. Thank you for reminding me I'm still worth loving." Clara cried when she read that. Keanu held her and whispered, "You reminded me first." They didn't need a wedding. But one morning, while watching the fog roll in over the cliffs, Keanu pulled a ring from his pocket. Simple. Silver. Engraved with the word again. He didn't kneel. He just held it out and said, "This time, we write the ending." Clara took it. Not because she needed a promise, but because she already had one. The bookstore sat on the corner of a sleepy street in Carmel by the sea, nestled between a pottery shop and a bakery that smelled like cinnamon and home. The sign above the door was hand-painted, faded slightly from salt air and sun. It read, Chapter 2. They bought it from an elderly couple who were moving to Oregon to be closer to grandchildren. The space needed work, new shelves, new lighting, a fresh coat of paint. But Keanu liked that. He liked fixing things with his hands. Clara chose the color scheme. Soft blues and creams. The color of sea glass and memory. They didn't advertise. Didn't make a fuss. And yet people came. At first, just locals. Curious. Polite. Then, little by little, word spread. Not because of who Keanu was, but because of what the place felt like. Safe. Warm. Honest. There were no bestseller tables. No blaring music. Just shelves organized by mood, comfort, grief, wonder, beginnings. A handwritten note next to each section, pinned by Clara, invited people to take their time. Keanu worked the back room, cataloging, carrying boxes, sometimes fixing old chairs left by customers who said things like, "This one has history, can you give it another life?" He always did. Clara ran the front. She had a gift for remembering names, favorite authors, little things people thought no one noticed. A woman once told her she hadn't read a book in 20 years. Clara sent her home with 3. The woman came back a week later crying. "This place reminded me who I was," she said. They kept a coffee pot going, a donation jar for local shelters, a record player in the corner that only played vinyl, Billie Holiday in the morning, Fleetwood Mac in the afternoons, sometimes just the sound of pages turning. And at the heart of it all, Keanu and Clara. Not acting, not performing, just being. Some days, they didn't talk much. They didn't need to. A glance, a brush of hands, a shared smile as the sun poured through the front windows, that was enough. On their 1-year anniversary, they closed early. Not to celebrate, to remember. They drove up the coast, back to the cabin in Big Sur, the place where Elise had taken her last breath and left her first letter. It had sat empty all this time, untouched, as if waiting. Clara had never been inside. Keanu opened the door and let her walk in first. The air was thick with memory. Books still on the shelf. A dried rose in a glass bottle. The painting Elise had started but never finished, strokes of yellow and gold against a stormy sky. Clara walked through slowly, touching things with reverence. She paused at the old armchair, the one Keanu had read to Elise from. "She was here," Clara whispered. "She still is," he said. They stayed the night. Watched the stars through the skylight. Read to each other from a tattered copy of Letters to a Young Poet. Slept with fingers intertwined. In the morning, Clara left something behind, a folded letter, placed gently on the windowsill Elise used to sit beside. She didn't tell Keanu what it said. She didn't need to. They drove home in silence, hearts full. Back in Carmel, life settled into something beautiful. Keanu started writing again. Not a memoir. Not a script. Just fragments. Poems. Reflections. Pieces of moments that felt too soft for the screen but too important to forget. Clara began teaching workshops at the bookstore, creative writing, memoir, journaling for healing. Women of all ages came. Some hadn't written in decades. Some had never written at all. One day, during a class, a woman asked Clara what the secret was. To what? She replied. To starting over at our age. To believing it's not too late. Clara thought for a long time. Then said, "The secret is not looking for the kind of love you had before. It's being brave enough to receive the love that finds you after." Outside, Keanu sat on a bench, a book in his lap, a cup of tea growing cold beside him. He looked up as the door chimed and Clara stepped outside. She sat next to him. "You done saving lives for today?" he asked, teasing. She laughed. "Only the ones willing to be saved." He took her hand. "You saved me." She looked at him. "No," she said. "We found each other." The sun sank low, brushing the sky in pink and fire. And there they sat. Not heroes. Not legends. Just 2 people who had known love, lost it, and dared to believe in it again. Their story didn't end with fireworks. It ended with pages turning. With the smell of old paper and new beginnings. And the quiet, holy truth that sometimes, the greatest love story of your life begins when you stop waiting for one.